Hello guys, we are back in new fanfic, and if enjoying this then please share and like part 1. Now let's start the fanfic. The village hidden amongst the leaves was in ruins. The damage inflicted by the Kyubi no Yoko stretched for miles. Parts of the Great Wall that once encircled the hidden leaf village were destroyed, leveled by the destructive power of the nine-tailed fox, a creature capable of causing earthquakes and tsunamis with but a flick of its tails. The wall was not all that had fallen. The damage had spread into the districts of the village, wrecking the Hyuga compound and the Uchiha district along with revamping the plots of land owned by the Nara clan. The village known for its will of fire certainly suffered a great deal of damage because of the Kyubi's sudden attack. Not only had Konoha suffered major economic losses with all the costly damage, but the village had also lost a lot of manpower in the attack. Many prominent shinobi such as Akamichi Torafu, Uchiha Kagami and many others lost their lives during the attack. Perhaps the biggest loss was the Hidden Leaf's Yondaime Hokage, the Kiroi Senko, Namikaze Minato. With the loss of perhaps the most gifted shinobi Konoha had ever produced, the political climate was in disarray. The daimyo immediately called for the Sandaime Hokage, Hiruzen Sarutobi, to come out of retirement and assume the mantle of Hokage once again. And so there he was, the Kami no Shinobi, the legendary professor of Konoha and master of all forms of shinobi combat. Hiruzen Sarutobi was now left to struggle with one dilemma that stood out of many the Kyubi attack had left him with. At the moment, only he knew what had truly happened. Uzumaki Kushina, Minato's wife, the second Jinchuriki of the Kyubi, had through the meddling of Uchiha Madara, been forced to unleash the Kyubi during labor. It had all happened so fast, and before Hiruzen knew what happened, he had lost 12 Anbu operatives, amongst which 2 of Konoha's brightest medics, and soon after, his dear wife, Sarutobi Bawako. Madara's meddling had rushed Minato and Kushina into their untimely deaths as they sacrificed their lives to save Konoha and their newborn son, Naruto. Minato had called forth the Shinigami and sealed the fox's yin chakra within himself, sealing away its spiritual essence and by proxy its physical body. The yang chakra was sealed within Naruto as Minato knew without a doubt Konoha would come to face great danger, and would need the fox's power to overcome it. The Shinigami then took Minato's soul as payment for sealing the Kyubi's yin chakra, while Kushina died along with her husband, drained from her life force during the entire affair. Not even her unique Uzumaki vitality and longevity were able to save her, and thus Uzumaki Naruto became not only the third Jinchuriki of the Kyubi but also an orphan in the same night. What to do with you now, Uzumaki Naruto? Hiruzen wondered, looking down on the sleeping infant. Life would not be easy for this young one. No, whatever normalcy the child could have had it not been for Madara, was now out of the question. From an early age he would have to be protected and taught to defend himself and those around him. If only I had the time. Hiruzen reached into the makeshift cribs of blankets and plush pillows and held up the child. My dear Bawako, I could really use your help right now. As the Sandaime Hokage, his duties were to this village first and foremost. The lives of thousands surely outweighed that of one, even if this particular infant was the spawn of the 4th Hokage and the descendant of the near-extinct Uzumaki clan. And there it was. The answer to his dilemma was right before him. Another Uzumaki still lives. It was a risky move, Hiruzen was sure of it, but it was the only alternative he had. The Sarutobi clan could not adopt this one child and yet refuse the dozens of other children left without family, nor could he, in good conscience, make Naruto's status as a Jinchuriki public. There would be revolts, demands for a public execution by the civilian populace, and demands for Uzumaki Naruto to become a weapon with the sole purpose of destroying Konoha's enemies. Surely Minato and Kushina would understand, Hiruzen reasoned with himself. Even if he made Naruto's parentage public, he had his doubts if that would be enough to hail him as the hero his parents wanted him to be known as. And, surely, they would come for him. Iwa and Kumo would undoubtedly seek to assassinate the young boy, as would other villages. Minato and Kushina had, after all, gained fearsome reputations in their respective years of service, and if word of their offspring reached the other villages, the result could be catastrophic, potentially a cause for even. Hiruzen realized he could not hide the boy, for no matter how hard he would try, a leak of information would inevitably happen. There always were with secrets of this magnitude. Experience of over 30 years in office and 50 years of shinobi service had taught him that. Uzumaki Hattori. Hiruzen almost shuddered at the thought of Naruto growing up with that relic. Uzumaki Hattori was one of very few, if not the only one, left of the olden days when Konoha had just been founded by the Uchiha and Senju clan. He was old-fashioned, brazen and unsociable, but at the age of 117 he truly was a relic of the olden days, older than most shinobi villages as he came from a time in which shinobi were often nomadic clans, isolated from the world and servants to the highest bidder. The only village likely to be older than Uzumaki Hattori would have to be Takigakure, although the hidden waterfall had an erratic past of achieving power and losing it after a few years of prosperity. They had yet to recover their power after the last war with Konoha, prompted by an attempt on the Shodai's life. A sharp knock broke Hiruzen's thoughts. Enter, he called as he adjusted his robes and took a seat behind his desk. The double doors opened and Jiraiya of the Sannin entered with a half-hearted smile. His clothes were dirty, scathed with mud and ripped in several parts of his trousers. The huge scroll on his back, suspended by rope, seemed equally worse for wear. Yet despite his ragged appearance, Jiraiya retained his youthful appearance and exuberant disposition. Sensei, Jiraiya greeted. Jiraiya, I thought I told you to get some rest. You overexerted yourself during the battle. Jiraiya did not waver under his stern gaze, much to Hiruzen's chagrin. At 38 years old, Jiraiya was no longer the impulsive youngster that feared his rebukes. He was no longer the foolish genin who used the summoning jutsu on a whim and ended up lost for months. How they have grown so quickly, Hiruzen noted with a sigh as Jiraiya took a seat in front of him and helped himself to the sake, pouring a saucer full for his sensei and drinking from the jug himself. What brings you here, Jiraiya? The Gama Sennin helped himself to a good swing of the alcoholic beverage before answering. I want to know your plans for Naruto. Jiraiya met his sensei's eyes and waited patiently for an answer. Years ago, when he was still a youngster, Jiraiya quite enjoyed theatrics. However, the current situation was far too dire, too serious to joke about. Nobody but you and I know of Naruto-kun's parentage or status as a Jinchuriki, Jiraiya, and I intend it to keep it that way. At least for now, Hiruzen told him. As expected, Jiraiya's eyes narrowed and his eyebrows curved into a displeased frown. You know why, Jiraiya. Please, I simply do not have the will to argue. No, sensei, we are going to talk about this, Jiraiya forced. The kid's a hero. Why shouldn't the people be allowed to know this kid is just as much of a hero as his parents are? Minato wouldn't have accepted this, and don't even get me started on Kushina. She would probably level this whole village. This is only temporarily, Jiraiya, Hiruzen tried to appease his former pupil. As I am sure you can imagine, there's a lot on my mind. I have yet to speak with the council, the daimyo's delegates or the populace for that matter. For the time being, it is of the utmost importance that we organize ourselves, treat our wounded and take some serious damage control. And then what? After all the fussy clans have been appeased, the politics have been all said and done and the villagers brought out of evacuation, what then? Don't tell me you intend to have the boy put in an orphanage, or even worse, become a weapon. Hiruzen sighed. You are the boy's godfather, Jiraiya. No. Jiraiya's answer was direct and firm. I'm not a parent, sensei. You can't hand over a kid to me, it's just not possible. He would turn out just as messed up as I am. Besides, I can't look after a child when the village needs my intel, now more than ever. He made a valid argument, but truth be told, Jiraiya simply did not want to be reminded of his late student. Minato had been like a son to him, his legacy and his pride and joy. Jiraiya hadn't even looked at the infant since he had entered the office. He knew the second he looked into the child's vibrant blue eyes he would see the boy's father. Naruto would serve as a painful memory, one he clearly did not want or need right now. Then what do you suggest, Jiraiya? If you, the boy's godfather, will not take him, who will? The council will undoubtedly push for an ultimatum: either Uzumaki Naruto becomes a weapon or he will be executed. Knowing R. Hiruzen paused for a moment as he searched for the right word. Misguided daimyo, he will support the clans that have his favor, the very same clans that will push for either execution or turning the boy into a weapon. Why don't you make this public? Jiraiya suggested, clear desperation in his voice. Make it common knowledge what a hero Naruto is before the council can make the motion to use him as a weapon. If the people find out want an injustice they're planning. Jiraiya, Hiruzen said with an annoyed rise in his tone, causing baby Naruto to shift uncomfortably and yelp. You're grasping at straws. The people of Konoha have just lost countless of loved ones once again. It hasn't been 10 years since the last war and now they have once again suffered such a loss, all in one night. They will not take this very well. I'm sure you remember the riots only a few years ago, or have you forgotten? Let me remind you. It was at the time Minato-kun completed the Hiraishin and proved to be capable of decimating the enemy. We were finally beginning to win a war we would have otherwise undoubtedly lost. Do you remember now? The cries for blood, the cries for an attack on Iwa, to tear them apart and forever render incapable of rebuilding just as they had tried to do to us. They will not accept this, Jiraiya. The sooner you stop fooling yourself the better. We must come up with a viable solution, one that does not harm Minato's child. Then what do you suggest, sensei? Jiraiya demanded, venom laced to his tone. You know I can't take him. And if you're thinking about Tsunade, think again. Last I spoke to her she was still depressed about Dan's death. According to her assistant, she hasn't used any ninjutsu in months. She won't be able to protect Naruto, and like I said, Konoha can't afford the loss of intelligence if I take him. We have to come up with something else. Sensei and student locked eyes for a moment, sitting in silence and contemplating on what the other was thinking. Hiruzen knew Jiraiya better than his student thought he did. He knew Jiraiya would not want to live with a reminder of his beloved student, but he wasn't nearly cruel enough to confront him about that. After all, he had lost Orochimaru forever only recently. It made no difference if his heart was still beating, the kind boy Hiruzen knew years ago was lost forever. Hiruzen sighed wearily. He felt far older than he appeared to be. There's one more option, Jiraiya, he began quietly, Uzumaki Hattori. You've got to be kidding me. Jiraiya interrupted loudly. That old man is crazy. Not only does he make you look like a spring chicken, he's completely and utterly crazy. What kind of childhood would Naruto have with him, living with that relic? It is far better than any alternative we have come up with so far, Jiraiya, Hiruzen countered. Now, if you will let me finish. Uzumaki Hattori is indeed old and rather out of it, but if we have a caretaker along with him to look after the child, Naruto may still have a childhood with some degree of normalcy. A sheltered childhood is better than no childhood at all, surely you would agree to that. For a few moments Jiraiya was quiet. The Sandame's arguments were infallible and he had no better solution than the old man did. All right, Jiraiya finally conceded. All right, if the old man is willing to take the boy in, and if he is willing to allow a caretaker. I'll make sure to protect the kid to the best of my ability whilst maintaining my information network. I won't be in the kid's life much, but it's better than nothing. It's all hell of a lot better than what I had. Jiraiya rarely referred to his orphan childhood, and so there was an uncomfortable silence Jiraiya decided to break after a moment. Who do you have in mind for this caretaker job? Jo-san Shitaji, Hiruzen said almost instantly. Hiruzen knew she was the best for the job. Not only was she one of Kushina's midwives, she was one of her closest friends. Kushina had requested her to be there when Naruto was born, she was to be the boy's godmother. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. He had never heard of this Taji nor had Kushina ever mentioned her as her choice for godmother. She and Minato had decided they would pick godparents respectively, and although he had never asked Kushina directly about her choice, it still struck him as odd. I'd like to see her file, sensei. Jiraiya, she's an Anbu operative. You know I cannot divulge you in such information without good cause. This shitstorm isn't a good enough cause for you. Jiraiya challenged. Hiruzen's expression remained blank, prompting his former student to glare at him. Fine, Jiraiya said as he moved towards the door. I'll just track her myself and test her skills firsthand. I'm not going to let an incompetent kunoichi take care of Minato's kid. Just as his hand gripped onto the door, Jiraiya heard Hiruzen give a heavy sigh in defeat. All right, I will fetch the file. Here, take Naruto-kun and wipe that smirk of your face, Hiruzen told him with a frown, passing the newborn to the toad sage. Hiruzen took his seat behind his desk and called for his secretary to take a break for good measures. Receiving a comply, the Hokage stood out of his chair and made his way to the far end of his office by the framed pictures of the Shodai and Nadaime Hokage. A quick ram hand seal later and the walls began to shift and contort rapidly as a safe became visible. Another minute later Hiruzen took his seat once again and placed the file on his table. There you have it, Hiruzen said with a motion of his hand. What he had just done, handing over information on Anbu operatives, was strictly forbidden and against protocol, but Jiraiya had given him no choice. He had no doubt in his mind whatever Jiraiya had planned to test Josanshi Taji's skills would likely maim her or perhaps even kill her. Jiraiya was a perfectionist and if he were to trust anyone with the life of his godson it would have damn sure be someone skilled enough to protect him. Let's see. Jiraiya settled baby Naruto in one arm and flipped pages with another, nodding as he took in the information. 3 years in Anbu, not bad. Hey, she belongs to the same squad I was in. Jiraiya moved the page over and continued to read out loud. First class medic, an affinity for water and fire. Overall considered to be a B-ranked shinobi. I see she's got a clean slate. No previous warnings or reports of misconduct. You will see she is of sound character. Kushina was very close to her and trusted her unconditionally. Hiruzen nodded. You would perhaps have known of their friendship if you were actually here longer than 6 weeks a year, Jiraiya. Jiraiya looked up at his sensei with annoyance, but allowed the comment to slide and continued to read the file. Alright, she'll do, Jiraiya decided after a long moment of silence broken only by the baby's ling noises. The question is, how are you going to hide the fact one of Konoha's first-class medical ninja is gone without a trace? Having her declared as a rogue shinobi won't do much good, especially if they sent Hunter Nin after her. She'll just end up endangering Naruto. Do not fret, Jiraiya, Hiruzen assured him, balancing the infant in his arms. I will simply fudge the paperwork. I'll have her set on a triple S rank mission on papers. It may be a little risky but I have no doubt I will be able to bury her name. A triple S rank mission. Jiraiya repeated, shifting Naruto's weight. Do those kind of missions even exist? They're unheard of, old man. Are you sure you're not losing it? They're unheard of, but they exist, Hiruzen replied pointedly. Common knowledge amongst most civilians and shinobi is that classifications go up to A rank. However, the more seasoned shinobi will know of the S-rank classifications but only the higher-ups of villages will know of double and triple S-ranked classifications. No need for the history lesson, sensei, Jiraiya commented with annoyance. He wasn't a damn underling anymore. It was simply embarrassing how his old sensei could still speak to him as if he were the same ignorant genin from all those years ago. How come I haven't heard of them before? I'm the strongest shinobi you've got. Hiruzen's expression went blank. Oh, but I did not realize you still considered yourself as one of my shinobi, Jiraiya, he replied with dry wit. What? With you coming and going as you please, whenever you please. No, I did not believe it to be prudent or necessary to inform you of this mission grade. Only certain groups within the shinobi forces know of and take on these missions. You, Jiraiya, are an individual. One I have long since given up on grooming for my position. Why would I tell you anything that is strictly on a need-to-know basis? A pointed silence resumed, in which Jiraiya glared at Hiruzen, who looked at him impassively. Something had broken between them a long time ago. He wasn't sure what or why, but he knew he no longer looked up to the man before him. Even after Orochimaru and Tsunade had left their home, Jiraiya remained as a valuable asset, and yet his former sensei did not seem to appreciate him at all. Still, Jiraiya pushed aside those thoughts. This wasn't about him, this was about Naruto. This was about Minato's child. That makes sense, Jiraiya replied. Of course it does, Hiruzen replied with a mirthless smile. If you can pull it off, then by all means do it. What worries me is that old fart, Uzumaki Hattori. The guy is literally ancient. He must have gone senile by now. I'm afraid so, Hiruzen agreed. We must move quickly. Hiruzen showed an oddly satisfied grin. You don't expect the Sandaime Hokage to leave Konoha in times of crisis, do you, Jiraiya? Jiraiya cursed vehemently under his breath. A week later, Hai no Kuni countryside. Within hours after having decided what to do with Naruto, Hiruzen and Jiraiya had taken action. Josan Shitaji was summoned to the Hokage's office and sworn into secrecy over her next mission. The Kunoichi had been surprisingly fierce about the proposition and even requested they placed a cursed seal on her to forbid her from speaking of her mission, should she ever be captured. Taji's loyalty to her best friend was admirable and she took her duties as godmother very seriously, although she had never been asked officially to fulfill the duty. Hiruzen had her pack her things an hour after her briefing while he prepared the necessary paperwork for the SSS-ranked mission that would last for a minimum of 13 years. Jiraiya took an instant liking to Taji and respected her enough not to make a single inappropriate remark. It was rather unusual for the Sannin, but Hiruzen was grateful. The Toad Sage respected Taji for her loyalty and determination and so took a liking to her, promising her she could always rely on him for protection and funds should it ever be necessary. Within 2 days all had been prepared and so the surrogate mother, newborn and sage set off for Uzu no Kuni. The plan was to first make it to Ritaruwana, a small-time harbor village, and appropriate a ship to the island known as Whirlpool Country. Jiraiya-sama, Naruto-kun needs to be fed again. Jiraiya groaned loudly and turned on his heels. Again? He asked, to which Taji merely nodded. I swear, all the kid does is eat, sleep and poop. He is a baby after all, Jiraiya-sama, Taji replied meekly. Of course, Jiraiya said with unjustified ire. We're just a few hours away. Can't the kid hold it up? Jiraiya whined childishly, causing Taji to laugh. Sorry, Jiraiya-sama, but my duty is to Naruto first and foremost. If you wish to move on without us, feel free to do so, Taji joked good-naturedly, shifting the infant Naruto in her arms. You sure are serious about this whole surrogate mother business, Jiraiya commented. The hermit walked over to a tree and placed a hand on its bark. Nodding appreciatively, he swiftly chopped at it with his hand. It was like cutting through butter with a hot knife as the tree fell. Oh, Naruto-kun enjoyed that. Taji held up Naruto for Jiraiya to see his wide eyes, as if he could comprehend the impressiveness of what Jiraiya had just done. I must say, he is an unusual baby. He doesn't cry or laugh at all. He only gurgles when he's been fed. As shrewd as his old man, course you are. Jiraiya pinched Naruto's cheek. He instantly regretted the action as Naruto retaliated by vomiting over his hand. Ah, gross. He did that on purpose. Taji merely smiled. Oh come on now, Jiraiya-sama. He is only a baby. Yeah right. Jiraiya pointed at Naruto's smiling face. Look at him, he's smiling. Oh, my. Naruto has his mother's infectious smile. Shores of Uzu no Kuni. The journey to Uzu no Kuni had taken a little over 2 weeks in total and had gone smoothly without incident. It took much longer than Jiraiya had anticipated, but it couldn't be helped. They were carrying a child with them after all, and the toad sage did not mind in the least. During the duration of their journey, he and Taji swapped many stories, even about classified missions they had performed as Anbu. There was no need for any more secrecy, as only one secret now truly mattered, and that was Naruto's existence until he was old enough to defend himself. Naturally, Jiraiya had for more thrilling tales to tell, and he indulged Taji in many of his exploits. He told her of the noteworthy shinobi he had faced in battle, the places he had been, and even gave her a copy of his first book, The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. Taji promised him she would read it to Naruto, although he attempted to dissuade her from doing so, as the only people that actually liked the book were his sensei, Fukasaku, Minato, and Kushina. The mentioning of the latter two only further strengthened Taji's resolve, however, as she told him Naruto should know what kind of person his parents had wanted him to be. The journey came to an end not long after reaching the island of Uzu no Kuni. It was a few hours before they had reached their destination, Uzushiogakure. The village hidden amongst the whirlpools. As they neared the outskirts of the village, Jiraiya noted how the scars of battle had yet to leave the landscape. The Sannin had been to the village only on 3 other occasions in his life. Back then the village had been rather impressive, with its wide roads, cylinder-shaped buildings, and impressive designs of infrastructure that separated carriages from the pedestrians. In the middle of the village was its monument, a plaza decorated with statues and buildings in honor of their village leaders and other prominent figures that had been produced by the village. It was a dark chapter of the shinobi world indeed, as Uzushiogakure had been razed to the ground. The details were vague, and whatever evidence had been submitted was not enough for Konoha to go to war over. It had been too late once Uzu had been wiped out by the massive attack spearheaded by Kumogakure and Iwagakure and backed by smaller shinobi villages. Jiraiya shook his head as they neared the remains of the walls that once been vast and protected the village. The Sannin ran a few diagnostic jutsu to detect trap seals the village had once used. Strangely enough, he found none. Performing the jutsu once again, Jiraiya received similar results. Strange. The old man is either dead or he doesn't care anymore. Either would be just as bad. If the man was dead, they had wasted weeks of traveling. If he simply did not care, then there was a good chance he would refuse to look after Naruto, descendant or not. Follow my lead carefully, Taji, Jiraiya instructed. As she nodded, he continued to lead the way into the ruins of the once proud nation of Seal's masters. Where are we going? Taji spoke so softly she was almost whispering. Clearly she was just as anxious as Jiraiya was. Jiraiya merely waved a hand at her and continued to lead the way to the one place he was sure the old man would be at, the plaza in the heart of the village. As they walked through the streets of Uzushiogakure, Jiraiya was reminded how large and grand the city had been, nearly stretching across the entire island, which was at least 3 times as big as Wave Country. You've got some rich heritage right here, Naruto. If we're lucky, the old fart might have saved some of the scrolls. After nearly an hour of carefully threading through the village, they had finally reached the plaza. The plaza retained much of its beauty, although there were some fallen pillars strewn across it. A fountain molded into a large spiral stood between the statues. Jiraiya's heart skipped a beat upon arriving in the plaza. Sat in a lawn chair before the statues was a figure with his back facing them. The figure sat in a rather hunched back fashion, and from what Jiraiya could tell he appeared to be sleeping. The old man had long, white hair that reached the small of his back. He wore black overalls under the traditional marine blue armor of Uzushiogakure shinobi and a red sash around his waist. Holding out an arm in front of Taji to motion her behind, Jiraiya cupped hands over his mouth. Uzumaki Hattori. Jiraiya called out to the man. Uzumaki Hattori seemed to wake up instantly at the sound of his voice and began to turn to face him. Jiraiya. Ooh. An hour later, Jiraiya sat opposite of Uzumaki Hattori in a cross-legged position and his hands on his knees. The Sannin was still surprised Hattori was still alive, but hid it impeccably and engaged the old man in a nostalgic conversation. Hattori had once been a ruthless shinobi, appeared on every battlefield he stepped on and challenged by very few. Jiraiya had detested this man since his youth for his cutthroat attitude and old-fashioned views, but the years of solitude had mellowed him out. Hattori seemed as dangerous as a one-winged fly. Jiraiya wasn't even sure the old man was listening to half the words he was saying when he tried to explain the situation to the old man. Hattori seemed to nod every now and then, grunt noncommittally. With his droopy eyes and constant nodding off, Jiraiya doubted Uzumaki Hattori was in a state to take care of anyone. I see, Hattori croaked with a tired nod. My my descendant, he then decided to simplify, is in danger of assassination by Iowa, Kumo and quite possibly his own birth country for being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, and now you wish to hide him here until he becomes old enough to defend himself. I see. Yes, Jiraiya said with relief. It had taken over an hour to explain the rather simple situation to Hattori. In Konoha he will either end being executed, turned into a weapon or treated with contempt for his entire life. His parents had made enemies in Kumo and Iowa and they would undoubtedly attempt to take his life. Hattori nodded slowly, encouraging Jiraiya to continue. With your permission, we would like to hide Naruto here. I do not expect you to protect him, that is why his caretaker, Taji, Jiraiya motioned the Anbu medic in the corner holding Naruto, is here. She will protect him and teach him the shinobi arts. She is skilled in providing for Naruto as well as you if you so wish it. The boy's hair is not red. All Uzumakis have red hair, Jiraiya. Hattori did not pose it as a question, more like a statement and patiently waited for Jiraiya to explain. Kushina had red hair. Why does this young child not have red hair? He must have red hair. Jiraiya resisted the urge to groan. The boy's father, Namikaze Minato, I'm sure you have met him, had blonde hair. Apparently Minato's genes were the dominant ones. This was rather ironic, Jiraiya thought with an inward chuckle. In their relationship, it had clearly been Kushina who called the shots and Minato went along with her every command. Jiraiya snapped out of his inner thoughts and put up a serious expression. I assure you, this is indeed your descendant. You must have some way of testing that for yourself, do you not? Hattori remained silent for the rest of Jiraiya's explanation and only spoke when the hermit had finished. Jiraiya, no tests will be necessary. I believe you, I can feel it in this boy myself. He possesses the distinctive chakra only an Uzumaki would. Hattori spoke with his croaky voice. The ancient man reached for the canteen Jiraiya offered him and took a few gulps before continuing with a more grave tone. Jiraiya, my days are waning. The Uzumaki traits of longevity and vitality have kept me alive for an exceptionally long time, even by clan standards. However, even I will die eventually. Over the years my hair has gone white, not gray, but white. This happens only when an Uzumaki lives long enough to reach an age where his body can no longer go on and his life force begins to gradually decrease. Hattori paused to allow the information sink with Jiraiya and then continued a moment later. My life is circling in the drain and soon Uzumaki Naruto will be the very last of the once great Uzumaki clan. You wish to teach him? Yes, Hattori nodded. The Uzumaki clan will live on in Naruto, but he must also carry out our traditions not only in blood but in knowledge. I will teach him, educate him into a fine shinobi. At my age I am no good for ninjutsu or taijutsu, however there are a great many things I can and must pass on to Uzumaki Naruto. From there on out, Jiraiya and Hattori spend hours upon hours of discussions. Jiraiya clearly did not trust the old man and wanted to know every detail of what he wished to pass on to Naruto. Eventually, after much discussion, Hattori had promptly stood up and beckoned Jiraiya to follow him. The relic led him into the great tower of the village where the village leader ruled from and where the villagers would flee to in case of an evacuation order. Jiraiya soon came to understand he had never truly seen all of Uzushiogakure as underneath the surface were a labyrinth of secret pathways, tombs and honeycombs of storage facilities as well as hidden training grounds. The founders of Uzushiogakure had truly designed a magnificent village. Those unfamiliar with the hidden underground of the village could get lost for days if not forever in the maze-like underground. Hattori led Jiraiya through the pathways swiftly and moved without a doubt in his direction. The old phantom knew the underground by heart. Eventually the two came to stop before a huge pair of double doors, 20 feet in width and 50 feet in height. What is this? Jiraiya asked the old man, feeling a sense of suspiciousness. He wasn't comfortable in the slightest with the man in the poorly lit labyrinth under the village. This, Jiraiya, is the treasure trove of my people. Of Naruto's people, Hattori told him and promptly bit his thumb and went through a complex string of seals Jiraiya could not recognize. This is Naruto's heritage. The massive double doors groaned and moved slowly, causing enough tremor for small chunks of rocks to fall down. They had not been used for years, Jiraiya noted. As the doors split open, Jiraiya's eyes widened considerably. Before him was a giant hall of shelves containing thousands of scrolls and books. What is this? Jiraiya turned to Hattori with an obvious sense of shock in his voice. Is this what I think it is, Hattori? Are these? Yes, Jiraiya. These are all the jutsu my people, and Naruto's people, Hattori was keen on reminding him of that, have acquired over the years. Some of these were thought to be long forgotten, others were made forbidden and a few were thought to be destroyed. This is the heritage of Uzushiogakure founded by the Uzumaki clan. This is Naruto's heritage. Jiraiya dropped all inhibitions as he entered the tomb. Even he, the legendary Gamma Sennin, had been swept away with such profound shock he could not help to feel like a child in sweets shop. Oddly enough, all the scrolls were kept in pristine conditioning, protected by the array of seals set up by the Uzumaki clan many generations ago. Our knowledge was feared so greatly, Kumo and Iwa and many others sought to destroy us. They never found what they were looking for, however, Hattori cackled with glee. They came in search of power to destroy their enemies and they found nothing. These are amazing. Jiraiya read the tag on a rather thick scroll and made to reach for it only to violently propel him backwards and into the ground. Jiraiya groaned and swore loudly as he got sat up. What was that? Only those of Uzumaki blood may touch these scrolls, Hattori explained, walking over to the shelf Jiraiya had been looking at. Allow me to demonstrate. Hattori reached for the very same scroll Jiraiya had reached for and plucked it off the shelf. A quick hand seal later and the scroll glowed for a moment. You may copy its contents, if you wish, but return the original to the shelf when you are done, will you? Jiraiya caught the scroll midair and reads it label with wide eyes. The reverse 4 symbol seal, this is an S-ranked kinjutsu. It was said to be lost generations ago. Jiraiya quickly created a kage bunshin and had it copy the scroll's contents as he joined Hattori, who stood in his hunchback posture. Thank you. Hattori did not acknowledge his gratitude and got straight to the point in his croaky voice. You see why it is so important for me to pass on the Uzumaki clan's teachings to Naruto, Jiraiya. Jiraiya for his part scratched his cheek in thought. I can certainly see why you would think so, Hattori. I have no problems with him learning of his clan, but I do not want to see him become obsessed with obtaining all jutsu. I have lost a dear friend to such obsession and I will not stand by and watch Naruto follow in the same footsteps. Of course not, Hattori quickly conceded. A little too quickly, but the ancient shinobi pressed on it quickly. I intend to only teach him of our seals. That is the most important heritage you will find here. What he plans to do with the rest of the jutsu obtained is up to him. Should he wish to share it with Konoha, so be it. He will be the new head of the Uzumaki clan when I am gone. Jiraiya's expression instantly lit up, seeing a great chance for Konoha to obtain more jutsu. At times like these, when the village had been greatly weakened, a larger arsenal of jutsu at their disposal was exactly what they needed. Then I accept your offer. You can teach Naruto all about his heritage as long as you stick to Fuinjutsu. The following 2 weeks had passed. Jiraiya spent most of his time with Taji, guarding her and young Naruto. However, conversation soon became mundane as Jiraiya had conversed many hours before with Taji on their journey and thus they had run out of subjects to talk about. And so Jiraiya began spending time with Uzumaki Hattori, the oldest man he knew. At the age of 117, Uzumaki Hattori was like a never-ending fountain of information. The old Uzumaki had many things to tell and had a surprisingly sharp memory as he could remember a great many details Jiraiya had never heard of. As much as Jiraiya enjoyed listening to the old man's story, he was quick to remember why he had never truly liked the man. Hattori was as old-fashioned as it got. He believed in might makes right, and other outdated ideologies. He wouldn't go so far as to call him a warmonger, but he would likely see eye to eye with Danzo, and that was never a good thing. Hattori had a habit of referring to how things were done in the old days and did not shy away from telling Jiraiya the gruesome details of missions he had gone on or incidents he was aware of. But despite his old-fashioned views, Jiraiya knew the man was hardly dangerous. Over the years his body had become weak and his ability to mold chakra had all but disappeared. Regardless, Jiraiya stayed for an additional 2 weeks by Taji's request. The old man too unnerved her, and though she was no weakling, being an Anbu operative, she felt safer for herself and Naruto knowing that Toad Sage was with them. Eventually, however, Jiraiya knew he could no longer stay on the island. Konoha needed his intelligence network as well as his presence at this time. The other nations would be significantly less likely to try anything if they knew Jiraiya of the Sannin was there. Although, Jiraiya would most likely only stay for a couple of weeks before moving on with his journey and gathering intelligence for Konoha that would safeguard it and its secrets from their enemies. Do you really have to go? Taji held Naruto in her arms as she followed Jiraiya out of the house. They had been making use of the duration of their stay. Jiraiya had quickly repaired much of the damage, being quite dexterous and restored the house's living conditions. So soon? Naruto and I need you. Jiraiya neared the door and reached for his red sleeveless coat and sat down in front of the door and pulled on his wooden sandals. I'm sorry, Taji, but Konoha needs my skills more. The sage turned to Taji and smiled reassuringly over his shoulder. I'll be back in a couple of months. If you need anything, you can send a messenger bird to the old man. Are you leaving because of Konoha or because of Naruto? Taji demanded, hugging the infant closer to her in a protective manner. Please tell me you're not leaving because he reminds you too much of Minato. Jiraiya stopped dead in his tracks and temporarily weakened his grip on his wooden sandals. Look, Taji, Jiraiya began softly, yes, the kid reminds me of Minato and it hurts, but that's not why I'm leaving. Jiraiya stood up and tapped the getas on the concrete floor before the door, painfully reminded of the fact he had missed out on Minato and Kushina's funeral and he hadn't even gotten the time to properly mourn his surrogate son passing. You're his godfather, Taji bit at him. Over the past few weeks she had gotten close enough to the Sannin to know her boundaries, and so she no longer referred to him with reverence. Naruto needs you. And I need you too, she quickly added. That old man scares the living hell out of me, Jiraiya. Jiraiya sighed tiredly for a moment and nodded. I know he does, but the man is harmless. Believe me when I say there is nothing he could do to hurt Naruto or you. He can barely mold chakra and you're an Anbu operative. Have some faith in yourself, Taji. Of course, the Kunoichi sighed. You better come back quickly. There's no way I can stand that man on my own for long. Naruto doesn't start training till his 6th birthday, but I got a feeling that old man is a bit too anxious to pass on his fuinjutsu to Naruto. Don't worry, Jiraiya assured her. It'll be fine. And you better be here for his birthdays, Jiraiya, or I will never forgive you. Got ya. I'll drop by every few months or so and I'll try. I'll definitely be here for his birthdays, Jiraiya quickly amended when he caught the scornful look that graced Taji's expression. Finally and reluctantly, Taji sighed in defeat. Alright, go. Konoha needs you, Jiraiya. Jiraiya placed his hands on her shoulders and nodded to her. Don't you worry, I'll be back soon. I sure hope so, Taji thought as Jiraiya closed the door behind him. Taji moved to the living room and pushed aside the curtains to see Jiraiya walk down the road. Because that man, Uzumaki Hattori, he scares the hell out of me. As if on cue, Naruto began to wail for food, reminding Taji of her duties as both a mother and wet nurse. It had been 3 weeks since Jiraiya left Uzushiogakure and Taji was already feeling as if she was losing her mind. Taking care of her new charge wasn't as tiring as it was tedious for the former Anbu operative. And while she loved little Naruto as if he was her own son and would sacrifice anything and anyone to protect him without hesitation, as she had proven by sacrificing her life and career in Konoha on only a few hours' notice, the day-after-day repetition of menial tasks had become incredibly boring as she catered to the newborn's wails for affection, food and changing. Still, it wasn't all bad. One of the good things about her situation was that Naruto slept for most of the day, thus allowing her plenty of time to read. It was an enjoyable pastime she rarely had time for when she worked in the field. Taji was also grateful for her elite training in Anbu, during which she was taught the Kage Bunshin, one of Konoha's most sought-after techniques. The shadow clone technique allowed her to find reading materials whilst simultaneously caring for Naruto. Uzu no Kuni was once a nation rich in literature and culture, so she experienced little to no difficulty finding reading material amongst the ruins. In addition, she was grateful for the rare medical scrolls from the vault Hattori brought over on his visits. The relic was extremely interested in Naruto and doted on him at every opportunity. Though not in the way that he would coo and tickle the child or that he would pull amusing expressions, but rather in the way he would hold the child and rock him to sleep as he told of grand tales that the child would not be able to understand for years to come. Naturally, Taji made sure none of his tales were as gruesome as the ones she had heard him share with Jiraiya, and Hattori had enough tact to refrain from such. At first she had been rather weary of the lone survivor of the silent massacre of Uzushiogakure, but eventually, as time crawled by and Hattori's visits to see Naruto became more frequent, Taji began to drop her guard. He is Naru-chan's grandfather after all, she reasoned with herself. He would never want to hurt him. Of course, technically speaking, Hattori was not the boy's grandfather, but he preferred it to whatever real relation he had to the boy, as he referred to himself as such when speaking to the infant. To Taji's immense surprise, she learned Hattori was the brother-in-law of the Shodai Senju Harashima and that the Uzumaki were related not only to the Senju clan but to the Uchiha clan as well. The relic generously indulged her in her many questions, apparently taking no offense to her curiosity and enjoying the opportunity to revel in nostalgia. He told her many stories dating back to the very founding of Konoha and beyond. In his lifetime, he had met with the Shodai many times, and Taji was excited to learn what little facts he was able to share with her. Strangely enough, the relic had a great deal more respect for Hashirama's younger brother, with whom he had more in common, she suspected, as the Nadaime was known to be a very pragmatic and secluded individual. Aside from the Hokage, Hattori also told her a tale or two about his sister, Uzumaki Mito, who was the bridge that bonded the Uzumaki and the Senju clans. Taji was fascinated by the knowledge that Hattori was the legendary Tsunade's great uncle. And while Hattori had a great deal of history to tell her, the most interesting of all was the history of the Uzumaki clan, a subject of great interest to her as her dearest friend Kushina had told her some on occasion, though not to the same detail. Taji learned that the birth of the Uzumaki clan dated back many hundreds of years ago, when the mythical Rakudo Sennin, the master of the Rinnegan and founder of ninjutsu, fathered 2 sons of whom the elder inherited his eyes and the younger inherited his body. Somewhere down the line of history, the Uchiha clan and Senju clan came to existence, seemingly destined to fight one another as their kin were hired by opposing nations at war. By this time, the Uzumaki clan had long since come to existence and lived isolated lives on this very island where they believed the sage was born and died, though they had never found his burial site. Hattori had even shared his theory, which speculated there was a good chance the Hyuga were close relatives to the Uchihas and by proxy to the Uzumaki and Senju as well, as they were also likely to be descendants of the older brother who passed on various mutations of the Rakudo Sennin's Rinnegan, a dojutsu she had never heard of before. Admittedly, this is an unfound theory, young one, Hattori had croaked. I would need to have access to the Hyuga shrines to trace their ancestry, but the Hyugas have always been very secretive of their affairs. They would never admit to having any blood relation to the Uchiha. Most notably, Hattori was very adamant that she understood one absolutely truth, and that was that the Uzumaki were scholars first and foremost. The Uzumaki did not start out as a shinobi clan, they came to be one for reasons beyond her thinking. The Uzumaki had an insatiable thirst for knowledge so great it took precedent above all else. This was not to say the Uzumaki were in any shape or form weak. In fact, they were far from it, as Hattori boasted on numerous occasions. It was in their pursuit of knowledge and understanding of the universe that the Uzumaki had grown both in wisdom and in power, developing unrivaled jutsu their enemies could not hope to match. In fact, they grew so powerful that Uzushiogakure was kept a hidden village since its founding as countless nations sought them out for their aid in their wars, barbaric wars the Uzumaki looked down upon with disdain, for they were above senseless violence. The Uzumaki did not fight unless it was absolutely necessary, they refused to participate in any conflict that did not involve them directly. Not even when they were asked by their cousins of the Senju clan to aid them against their mortal enemies of the Uchiha clan did the Uzumaki fight. Instead, they opted for neutrality as they were related to both clans and did not wish to be involved in their feud, which had lasted for decades. When asked how the Uzumaki sustained themselves without taking on missions or without a daimyo for funding, Hattori revealed to her that, while they preferred to keep it to themselves, they were not above trading in weapons, knowledge and some of the rare natural resources that could be found on the main island and on the smaller ones nearby, islands neither Jiraiya nor Taji had even noticed as they were hidden by genjutsu sustained by seals that were still active even now. In fact, to Taji's surprise, even the main island was hidden from view. But, Hattori-san, if this island was hidden all this time, how did Jiraiya manage to bring us here? She had asked with a confused frown permeating on her otherwise flawless skin. In response, the relic cackled with childish glee. A long time ago, Kushina returned to this island with that man and Jiraiya. By that man, Taji assumed he meant Namikaze Minato, for whom Hattori appeared to have a cool, grudging respect. Those born with Uzumaki blood will always be able to find this island. However, for those we consider allies, we have ways of letting them return. I suspect Kushina allowed that man and Jiraiya to return to this main island whenever they pleased. For once the silly girl's disregard for our ways turned out helpful. In her 3 weeks of living on the island, Taji accumulated more knowledge on the legendary Rakudo Sennin than most scholars did in a lifetime of research. She learned from Hattori that a great number of ninjutsu and bloodline limits could be traced back to the Sage of Six Paths. Virtually all dojutsu were mutations of the Rinnegan passed down the elder brother's lineage, while a great number of body-related Kekkei Genkei came down from the second brother's lineage. Amongst other these included the infamous dead bone pulse of the Kagaya clan. The Uzumaki, whom were born with strong chakra and incredible stamina, vitality and longevity, were undoubtedly descendants of the younger brother. As were the Senju, whose members were also born with strong chakra and bodies were capable of incredible ninjutsu, the greatest examples of this being the Shodai's Mokuden and the Nidaime's space-time ninjutsu. However, only the Uzumaki and Senju were born with the innate potential to master all elements, according to Hattori. This explained quite a great deal about Kushina's immensely powerful ninjutsu, something Taji had always been curious about. Truly, she had learned a great many things since she came to Uzushio, things she would otherwise have had no chance of learning, but still, she was no Uzumaki, and so her thirst for knowledge was not so great that it prevented her from sighing in utter boredom as time seemed to creep by at an increasingly slower pace. There was not much she could do for amusement other than reading. Even that had gotten dull, and considering how book smart she was, as most good medics were, That was quite unusual. Fortunately, Hattori found a remedy to her boredom and gifted her with a few scrolls of practically ancient medical jutsu from the Uzumaki vault, claiming that she was now an honorary member of the Uzumaki clan now that she was Naruto's mother. Taji suspected it was Hattori's way of getting closer to her son but was very much grateful for the opportunity nonetheless and relished in the practical exercises she could now spend her time on. She had been giving free rein over the medical jutsu shelves in Uzushio's treasury tomb and left Naruto in the care of Hattori while she went to look for more jutsu. Thank you, Hattori-san, I'll be back soon. It is no problem, take your time. I will take good care of the boy while you're gone, Hattori croaked as Taji slipped on a pair of shoes and rushed out of the door to gather some of the rare herbs that grew near the coast. They would be perfect for her research. As the door closed with a soft clicking noise, a sinister snarl crept onto Hattori's face. Listen closely, young one, someday soon you will become the next Uzumaki clan leader. I will raise you and I will nurture you. I will make you strong so that one day you can rebuild Uzushiogakure and destroy our enemies. They will pay for what they have done. They will all pay. A cackle escaped Hattori's throat. It was a frightening kind of laughter that did not hide the hatred in his voice as he spoke. Soon, Naruto, you will begin your path to greatness. A cry escaped the infant as the baby boy began to bawl fearfully, scared beyond measure. Hattori's dark demeanor evidently upset the child. Silence. The child fell silent on command, looking up to his great ancestor with bulging blue eyes and silent cries emitting from his small mouth. Uzumaki Naruto would begin his path to greatness soon, willingly or unwillingly. 2 years later. Naruto aged 2. Once she had finally and truly settled in Uzushiogakure, time went by fairly quickly, Taji noticed. Her days went by in a blur of systematically changing, feeding and nursing Naruto and studying and developing new medical jutsu in her spare time. Naruto was a rather scrawny baby and stayed remarkably skinny despite fears of being overfed. Hattori eased her fears soon enough, informing that Uzumakis had extraordinary metabolisms as a byproduct of their extraordinary longevity and vitality. The relic assured her that by the time Naruto reached puberty he would fill out accordingly. The ancient Uzumaki had kept his distance for the most part of the 2 years. Occasionally he would ask Taji to help with his chores, such as setting up traps to capture wildlife on the island or with skinning the fish he caught every now and then. Taji assumed he was just trying to be thoughtful by giving her excuses to get her out of the house where she spent most of her time with Naruto and doing her research, so she indulged him. Her fears of the man had all but disappeared over time. She did not mind his occasional visits to check up on Naruto in the slightest. And as promised, Jiraiya had dropped by every 3 to 5 months and was always on time for Naruto's birthdays. He never stayed longer than a few days, but Taji was deeply grateful for his company and the much appreciated supplies he brought with him. Jiraiya typically doted on his godson whenever he visited the island, though Naruto seemed to forget who he was each time as Jiraiya never stayed long enough for Naruto to remember him. Taji was rather worried about her son as the child took after Kushina, and being the bundle of energy he was, it was becoming increasingly more difficult to keep track of. This only worsened by the time Naruto could walk at 1 year old. The child truly was Taji's pride and joy however, and she began to increasingly dread the day she would have to tell him she was not his real mother. Still, she comforted herself with the knowledge there were still quite a few years left. She was still the one he looked to when he was hungry or upset, and she was still the one he babbled to in his increasingly coherent sentences. And when he grew old enough, she would be the one to put a kunai in his hand, teach him the hand seals, how to manipulate his chakra, and one day, help him understand heartbreak. Kacchin, hungry. Taji looked down at the adorable 2-year-old standing in front of her recliner with his arms outstretched. Of course, honey, Taji cooed, picking up the child that'd been playing peacefully with his blocks before. Let's get you some food, Naruto-chan. Taji snuggled against the squealing toddler while walking into the kitchen. She held the child in one arm and opened a cupboard with another. After making the boy a snack, she sat him down by his toys and watched with a sense of fascination at when young Naruto switched between eating with his left and playing with his right hand. Naruto was extraordinarily intelligent for a child. Taji could tell by the way he placed the cubes in symmetrical order, building small fortresses and other buildings that oddly enough resembled the cylinder-shaped buildings of Uzushio. She couldn't help but smile with a great sense of pride as the years continued to fly past. 2 years later. Naruto aged 4. It had been a few months after Naruto's 4th birthday, and to Taji's great dismay, Jiraiya hadn't shown up. Although she made plans to thoroughly chew him out for it the next time she saw him, she acknowledged that she would have to cut him some slack given the nature of his work. Life as the Toad Sage, which mandated Jiraiya had to travel the world and seek to cure imbalances in nature, as Jiraiya had told her during of their long talks, as well as being in charge of supplying Konoha with a great deal of information, had to be hard on the man. Jiraiya did seem to genuinely care for his godson, so he probably wished he could visit more often, and at the very least he regularly sent Toad summons bearing gifts and supplies for the both of them. At age 4, Naruto was a curious child with an unusually long attention span, a trait that Taji pinned on his lack of interaction with other children his age. The boy could listen for hours on end as his grandfather told him of the olden days, though his recollections were toned down on the details in Taji's presence and were simplified for the child to understand. Hattori increasingly spent more and more of his time with the child. Taji did not mind at first, as it allowed her to do some research on medical jutsu she could bring back with her to Konoha when the time finally came. However, as time went on, Taji would more often than not find Naruto waiting for her at his grandfather's house a few blocks away. Not only was it a disturbing thought for Naruto to be wandering about the ghost town alone, but Hattori had enamored the child to the point he sometimes would just up and leave to spend time with his grandfather without saying a word. And today was one of those days. Taji found herself walking down the familiar road down to Hattori's house. It was a short distance away from their house, and so she had come to cease worrying about Naruto making the small commute by herself. Nearing the small house, she entered through the front door and announced her present. Hattori-san, hello there. There was no answer, so Taji promptly made her way through the hallway, not bothering to take off her sandals as the wood-pan floor had withered and grayed immensely. Naruto-chan. Hattori-san. There was no answer. Naru. No. A fearful voice called out from the back. Taji instantly recognized it to be her son's. Alarmed, she ran through the living room and neared the parted slide doors to the garden and walked in on Hattori and Naruto in their back garden, where the old man was forcing Naruto to kill a stringed-up rabbit laid before him with a kunai. The child screamed and kicked, tears running down his chubby, whisker-marked cheeks as he resisted as much as he could. Jichin, I don't wanna. What are you doing, Hattori? Do as I tell you, child. Hattori bristled and forced the boy's kunai brandishing hand in the skull of the rabbit. It was not a clean kill. The rabbit convulsed uncontrollably, shaking and arching its spine. Blood spurted out of the entry wound and showered the last of the Uzumaki. The young boy bawled louder than Taji had ever heard before, prompting her maternal instincts to kick in as she surged forward with a burst of speed she could hardly believe she was still capable of. After 4 years of inactivity, she had gotten rusty, very rusty. However, it was apparent she could still command enough speed to yank Naruto out of Hattori's grasp and backpedal several feet away in the blink of an eye. What are you doing to my son? Taji demanded loudly with barely restrained anger in her voice as Naruto clutched onto her like a lifeguard, trembling in fear and shaking uncontrollably as he cried. What is the meaning of this, Hattori? She screamed whilst channeling her urge to kill. You are not his mother. Hattori spat with venomous insanity, clutching onto the kunai in his hand tightly. He got out of his seated position and staggered towards her in his hunched-back manner with a deranged look in his eye. That boy is not your son. Kacchin? Naruto asked fearfully. Kacchin, is that true? Taji couldn't bear looking him in the eye and merely held onto him tightly. Realizing the truth, Naruto began to cry even louder and buried himself in the nape of her neck, babbling incoherently through sobs and tears. Hattori. Taji spoke with barely restrained anger. I am going to take my son back home. You will not follow us. I will speak to my son, and after I have finished comforting him, you and I will talk. If you do not come with a satisfactory explanation, I am going to take my son and we will leave this island. Without another word, Taji quickly spun on her heels and left in a hurry, holding tightly onto Naruto and leaving Hattori to his own devices. As she left carrying Naruto, Hattori's eyes narrowed and he breathed heavily, literally shaking with anger, so much so the kunai bent under his grip, digging deep into his flesh and causing thin streams of blood to drip to the ground. Hattori had acted too soon, and as a result his plans were further set back. 1 year later. It had been a terrible ordeal for Taji the day she had found Naruto being forced to make his first kill on an animal. A year had passed since then, but even now she could clearly remember the day. Naruto had been inconsolable for the longest of times once he found out Taji was not his real mother, and ever since their relationship had undoubtedly changed. He still called her mother, but Taji knew it was purely out of habit. It was a painful reality, but Naruto clearly no longer saw her as his mother, but more like a caretaker or a distant relative. That same day she had gotten into her first argument with Hattori, and she quickly learned Hattori was incredibly unstable. Jiraiya had not come to visit on Naruto's birthday for the second time in a row. He had not once dropped by that year, and Taji could not help but feel some ire against her fellow godparent. Whatever misguided thoughts you may have, wench, that boy is my descendant. He is mine to raise and he is mine to teach. He will soon be the last of the great and most ancient Uzumaki clan. I will not have you meddle with my ambitions. Not since his mother have I seen such potential. I shall not let it be wasted, not again. He will not follow in her footsteps. At all costs, this boy will become a true Uzumaki, fit to sire the revival of the Uzumaki. Taji had been furious at that and responded with equal venom. Naruto was placed in my care. He is my son for all intents and purposes. Kushina selected me to be his godmother, therefore I am his mother and he is my son. I tolerated you being in his life because he took a liking to you, but you have betrayed our trust. What were you thinking, forcing a 4-year-old to kill? These are not the olden days, Hattori. Naruto is not like you. And if you ever talk about Naruto like he is some kind of tool again, we will be leaving this island for good. They argued for hours that day. Taji was tempted to inform Jiraiya and the Sandaime of what was happening, but eventually decided against it as Naruto was her son and as his mother she had to take responsibility. At first, she forbade Hattori from seeking out the boy on his own initiative, but the old man had disregarded her wishes and this of course led to more strife between them. After weeks of holding nothing but contempt for one another, they reluctantly reconciled. Taji forced herself to look past Hattori's actions as she understood he lived in the past, and what he had done with Naruto was no different from what he had experienced as a child. She could also see the good intentions in his actions, and coupled with Naruto's cries to see his grandfather, she could not avoid him for much longer anyway. That was a terrible mistake on her part, as her decision to allow Hattori back into their lives would forever change everything. It had been an ordinary day, only a few before Naruto's 6th birthday. The child was off playing in the garden whilst she prepared dinner, unbeknownst of a shadowy figure sneaking up on her. The shadowy figure was Hattori, and in his hand he carried a vial of special ink infused with chakra used for fuinjutsu. Taji's rusty Anbu senses kicked in too late, and before she knew what happened, she was blindsided and ink seeped into the skin of her face where a 3-eyed tattoo formed on her forehead. Juin. Shinshiki. The effects were instant and Hattori cackled with glee, triumphantly so as Taji's eyes went blank and unfocused. Young Naruto, hearing the commotion, went inside and walked in on a terrifying scene of his mother on her knees, drooling and unresponsive. Kacchin. Neither she nor Hattori spoke, both seemingly off in a distant space. Jichin. Taji's eyes regained focus and she returned Naruto's hug in a robotic fashion and cooed in a monotone voice for a moment before pushing him away. You have to go with Oji-sama, Naruto-kun. It's time to begin your training. Kacchin, you said I had to wait till I was 6 to start training. Taji's eyes remained blank but her grip on his shoulders tightened painfully. Do not argue with me, Naruto-kun. Do as your mother tells you to. The boy only nodded. No words came to him that could express his confusion. Wasting no time, Hattori grasped the boy's smaller hand in his own and began to drag him away, off to begin his training, off on a path he had not chosen but followed regardless, for his mother knew best. 1 year later. It was a year later and Hattori could not deny it. Uzumaki Naruto was a prodigy in a league of his own. He marveled at the boy's ingenuity and resilience. Everything he taught the boy, the child would absorb quicker than he thought possible, blowing away even his high expectations like they were nothing. Hattori often wondered how the boy would have turned out if he had enslaved Taji's mind sooner. Perhaps he would have been even more powerful. The mere thought of it could make his blood boil. Time was far more precious for him than anyone else. If only he had acted sooner. But there was something to be said for Taji, as much as he despised her. She was the driving force behind his heir. Her maternal affections were what motivated him, and thus he allowed her to retain her mind for the most part, meddling with her thoughts and brain only when she defied him. Over time, her moments of defiance became fewer and fewer, obedience seemingly lapping over into her subconscious. As a result, there were some noticeable changes in the former Anbu operative. His fuin had been applied rather haphazardly, and thus as a side effect, Taji's brain had degenerated in certain ways. She was still capable of doing his bidding but the damage was irreparable. Still, Hattori had to admit Taji was crucial in the development of his heir. It was the only reason she was still alive. Jiraiya dropped by on the Naruto's 6th birthday. He stayed for only 2 days and left after being relieved from his promise by Taji, who under Hattori's directive, told the Sannin his occasional visits were doing more harm than good as they would upset Naruto whenever he left, and after being reminded that his work for Konoha was certainly more important, Jiraiya readily agreed, promising to drop by at least once every 2 years instead. The very next day, the boy's training had begun. Hattori started with teaching the boy basic chakra control, calligraphy key for true fuinjutsu masters, tactics and strategy through medium of shogi. Soon, the boy had started reading tomes on the Uzumaki's heritage by himself. It was important that he knew about the clan's history if he were to ever lead it. Hattori's heir did not particularly like reading, he was much like his biological mother in that sense, but Hattori did not take no for an answer. The Uzumaki clan was known for many things aside from fuinjutsu, including literacy and intelligence. And so the boy obeyed, convinced that his grandfather and surrogate mother knew best. Within 2 months the boy had mastered a handful of basic E-ranked ninjutsu taught in Konoha's academy. From then on Hattori began to continuously and rapidly increase the scale. Tasks became harder, jutsu became more difficult and studying became much more intense. By the age of 7 Naruto mastered the basic chakra control exercises and moved on to fuinjutsu. It took him only a week to master tree climbing and just a few more days for water walking. Hattori knew Naruto had incredibly large chakra reserves for a young boy, even by Uzumaki terms, and made use of it by having Taji begin the child's training in advanced chakra control and manipulation. The woman had her uses as an Anbu-trained medic with near-perfect chakra control. She taught him a variety of medical jutsu along with her advanced chakra control and manipulation lessons whilst Hattori drilled the boy on the foundations of fuinjutsu, a particular branch of jutsu he excelled at far greater than anticipated. By the time he was 10, Naruto had already become a Jonin-leveled ninja. Most notably, his skill in fuinjutsu was remarkable and flourished in unpredictable ways due to his ingenuity and creativity. Naruto excelled greatly at all forms of shinobi combat taught to him and quickly absorbed fuinjutsu and ninjutsu, though his genjutsu was rather weak in comparison, despite his efforts. Hattori made sure the boy knew at least how to break high-level genjutsu before moving on to other subjects. Perhaps most notably, it soon became apparent Naruto had extremely high affinities for wind and water, typical of the Uzumaki clan, and so Hattori brought the boy scrolls from the Uzumaki clan vault that contained advanced uses of nature manipulation. One of the scrolls was particularly valuable as it was written by none other than Senju Tobirama as a gift to the Uzumaki clan. The scroll contained the secret to using the water molecules in the air for Suiten Jutsu. As valuable as that was, Naruto's natural gift for wind jutsu manifested itself in a rare form of telekinesis. It was truly remarkable, so great in fact, Hattori made it a priority his heir sought complete mastery of the technique, and thus Naruto spent hours in complete silence as he meditated whilst simultaneously exercising his control over his wind element to the point he could levitate an entire kunai set in perfect synchronization and in intricate sequences. At the age of 10 Naruto knew over 100 jutsu in total, ranging from all basic 5 elemental jutsu to medical jutsu, fuinjutsu, various arts and even a handful kinjutsu thought to be impossible to master by seasoned shinobi decades his senior. It was now the time, Hattori decided. Naruto met with his tenant. Uzu no Kuni Mountains. On the top of Uzu no Kuni's mountain terrain, many miles away from the village and on the other side of the island, the Uzumaki built a temple for Uzumaki Mito and the Kyubi. This temple was buried in the mountains, and began at the top and ended at the bottom in an enormous chamber, beneath sea level. The chamber served as a contingency plan, in case the Kyubi ever escaped Mito. Though, fortunately, this never happened. In the case it did, the entire lower part of the temple could have been disengaged and dropped to the depths of the oceans where it would be crushed and Kyubi would have likely died, buying them enough time to prepare for when it resurrected. 1. The temple went down hundreds upon hundreds of feet down the mountain, but Naruto diligently walked down the spiral stairs, carrying Hattori on his back. The seals that maintained this facility had long since run out of chakra and it reflected on the dusting state of the temple. It had been years since the elevators were last used, neither wanted to take the risk of damaging the temple anymore. It would simply add more to the burden of restoring the temple to its prime. "We are here, Oji-sama," Naruto announced as they reached the bottom chamber. It was cold, damp and worn. The walls were white and scratched, and rubble laid spread over the chamber that seemed to have been big. The white walls painted the illusion the chamber stretched out infinitely. The damage had clearly been done in training, but it would do for now. "My sister once roamed these halls," Hattori's voice carried out in an echo. "Here, she lived and trained. Here she awakened her chains, and here she conquered the Kyubi. And after her, your mother came here, and while she did not conquer the Kyubi, her chains surpassed even that of my sister, and so she was capable of controlling the beast. Now, it is time to begin your path to become the third Uzumaki Jinchuriki, and when the time comes, another Uzumaki, your son perhaps, will carry the burden. Your experiences here will aid the next generation." Naruto nodded as his eyes panned over the chamber. Everything was so white, just pure white. He almost couldn't tell the floor from the ceiling. "Oji-sama," he looked to Hattori with an uncertain look, "I have not yet awakened my chains. How am I to defeat the Kyubi without them?" "Defeat?" Hattori let out a laugh and shook his head. "You will not challenge the fox today, it is far too early for that. No, today, we will start slowly in that regard. You will meet the Kyubi, that is all. Do you understand me, child?" "Yes, Oji-sama," Naruto answered stoically with an obedient nod. In the privacy of his own mind he secretly feared Hattori greatly overestimated his abilities and deemed him ready to face the Kyubi in combat. The relic made no secret of his astonishment whenever he beat his expectations. Fortunately that was not the case. "I will do as you have taught me, Oji-sama," he said, moving away from Hattori, walking several feet away as close to the center of the chamber as he could. His footsteps echoed loudly into the infinity of white. Hattori's voice rang behind him, loud and grave. Be careful of the fox, child. Do not trust a word it says, and do not touch the seal. Naruto nodded to the relic in acknowledgement and sat down cross-legged. They had practiced meditating many times now. It almost came naturally. All he had to do was take a deep breath and close his eyes in. Ooh, Naruto's mindscape. This place is filthy. Naruto voiced the first thing he thought upon entering his mindscape. A low, grumbling noise followed his statement. It sounded irritated as though indignant of his remark. Kyubi, Naruto called out as he walked through the empty halls of the sewer. He felt a mixture of anxiety and fear, but he refused to go back so soon before even seeing the Biju. At last, my new jailer comes to visit me, a booming voice rang out as Naruto reached the end of the hall and stalked towards the shadows. Have you come to conquer me, boy? Come to force your will? No, Naruto said loudly as he walked towards a gigantic cage. Much to his own dismay, his voice shook and was laced with fear. I am here to talk. Kukuku, talk, yes, I am sure you are. Kyubi's voice carried in mocking laughter. I am no fool, insolent boy. Everything you see, I see. Everything you know, I know. You cannot fool me. Naruto seriously doubted this but did not question the fox just yet. There was nothing to gain from agitating the Biju. I see. The relic manipulates you, the Kyubi rang out from the darkness, his booming voice carrying out in an echo. You are as much a tool as the blade he put in your hand. Do you expect me to deny that? Naruto asked with genuine curiosity, tilting his head. It was a bad habit Hattori had beaten out of him, having deemed it undignified and unbecoming of an Uzumaki, but the relic was nowhere to be found now. In his mindscape Naruto was free. I do not deny it. I am fully aware of what I am. A tool. Yes. Naruto nodded simplistically, not even remotely challenging the statement. A tool. The Kyubi took a moment to process his response, clearly disturbed by the honesty of it at least somewhat. You have come here to talk. The fox released an impatient growl from its throat so great the air vibrated. Then speak. Will you please show yourself? Naruto asked as politely as he could. Why don't you open the cage? The Kyubi replied mockingly. His gigantic red, slit eyes glowed eerily in the shadows of the cage. I would be more than willing to show myself if you did. Naruto gave a shrug feigning non-discomfort. Maybe. One day. I'd like to. You would have me freed. Yes. Naruto replied firmly as though it were a simple answer to a simple question. Why not? He added as an afterthought, entertaining the possibility the fox preferred to dwell in his mindscape. Do you not know what I am, what I can do, what I have done? Do you have an idea what I would do, given the opportunity? Of course I do. I know all about you, Kyubi. Naruto gave a small smile as he eyed the fox with bemusement in his knowing. I thought you said you saw everything I saw and knew all that I knew. The fox moved forward, a gigantic humanoid claw hand grasping one of the humongous bars on his cage. It didn't speak, thus Naruto took as a sign to continue. You are the first son of the Rakudo Sennin, Naruto said as he took in the fox's entirety, smothering his fear it has begun to build up at the sight of the Biju's imposing enormity. Your name is Kurama of the Nine Tails and you are the former partner of Uzumaki Mito. How do you know my name? Kurama demanded with a booming voice, extending his remaining claw at Naruto in an attempt to rip his face off. Speak. Naruto jumped backwards, unable to steel himself from his own terror, and thus falling on his backside in his haste. His fear came back with a vengeance, but only for a moment, as he refused to lie there on the ground, terrified beyond his wits. With as much dignity as he could muster, he slowly picked himself up, keeping an apprehensive eye on the fox. Uzumaki Mito shared with her family what you told her, including your name and parentage. If the look on Kurama's face was any indication, the fox was about to completely lose it. Such betrayal. Uzumaki Mito did not betray you. Naruto didn't know why he felt this way, but he was offended by the notion. She did not betray your trust. She cared for you, Kyubi. The others, Even Oji-sama disapproved, but Uzumaki Mito, she knew love for you. You were more than just a tool to her, Kyubi. Naruto gripped his fists tightly as he walked closer into Kurama's reach, essentially putting himself at the Biju's mercy. She did not share the knowledge you entrusted her with out of spite. She did it because she hoped you would one day be treated with more decency and regarded as more than a monster. Kurama's eyes bulged and all anger left him immediately. The fox settled down, lying down on the ground as it processed the information. Are you alright, Kyubi? Naruto asked tentatively. You know my name, why not use it? Naruto let out a laugh. You permitted only Uzumaki Mito to call you by your name. I do not wish to offend you. You say you do not wish to offend me, but do you not realize I am the one responsible for the death of your parents? Kurama appeared to be irritated by his host's calm disposition, as though he had expected a confrontation. I haven't forgotten. Naruto shook his head. I saw you doing it, he added in quieter voice. Again, Kurama's eyes bulged. Then why do you show me kindness if you saw me killing your parents in an attempt to kill you? Because I understand it would only be natural for you want to prevent capture no matter what the situation. I can't fault you for wanting to be free, and because I have no qualms about being a Jinchuriki, Naruto answered truthfully to Kurama's visible surprise. I do not see you as a tool or a monster or even a weapon. No matter how upset I am over the fact you killed my parents. You are a part of me and I am a part of you, and that is what matters now. You speak wise words, but this wisdom was taught to you by a relic who sees you as a tool and a weapon, Kurama challenged, clearly irritated by his host's simplicity. Yes, Naruto agreed easily. But that does not stop me from understanding the truth. One day Oji-sama will no longer be around and it will fall on me to make my own decisions. This is one of them. And what is this decision exactly? Kurama asked, intrigued. Naruto gave another smile, and Kurama only now noticed how odd it was, as though the child had not smiled once before their meeting. I've decided I certainly will not become your master. Then what will you become? Your partner and your friend. Naruto's oddly smile turned into an even odder grin. It was an awkward smile others might have found grotesque and off-putting, but Kurama found it endearing. So much so Kurama couldn't help but part his massive fangs into something that resembled a smile. And what makes you think I will accept you? Your awkward smile, Naruto said with a raised finger. You should really work on that. Kurama burst out laughing, as did Naruto. Very well. I sense no malice in your heart, Uzumaki Naruto. I shall accept you as my partner, provided you swear you will never betray me. I will never do anything to hurt you, I swear it on my life, Naruto said with a serious expression. Provided you promise me the same. Then we have an agreement. Kurama acknowledged, extended a massive claw towards Naruto. I will be your friend and partner for life, Uzumaki Naruto. And I yours, Q. Kurama. The fox fell in. You may call me by my one true name. Kurama. Naruto nodded with a smile as he gripped and shook Kurama's claw. Your name suits you, as does yours suit you, Naruto. Ooh. Hours later, Hattori grew restless as he paced before Naruto, who remained in his meditative state. What is the meaning of this? Hattori repeated for the umpteenth time. The plan had been a short meeting with the fox, a meet and greet that shouldn't have taken longer than a few moments, and yet the boy remained still for half a day. Could he have done the unspeakable and released the fox? No, of course not. Hattori quickly dismissed the possibility out loud, chiding himself for his fears. The boy was far too intelligent to fall victim to the fox's wit. And even if he wasn't, the boy knew who to obey. Hattori considered waking the boy forcefully many times, but that did not strike him as a good idea. Who knew what would happen? Mito had always made a point of total solitude in her chamber. Hattori could not begin to imagine the chaos he could possibly cause if he even shook the boy. Damn you and your insolence, child. It was just as he said it, when chakra, bright crimson orange chakra, exploded from Naruto in all directions, tossing Hattori in the air. A shroud of chakra enveloped Naruto and 9 tails shot out from the small of his back and curled around him in a protective barrier. Hattori let out a pained growl as he landed on his old bones with a solid thud. He quickly scrambled to his knees, his eyes widened at the sight of his heir. "What is this?" he exclaimed raspily as Naruto's eyes opened. Rather than blue, the young Jinchuriki's eyes were red and slit. "Kyuubi. No, Oji-sama," Naruto said in a calm, baritone voice as he shook his head and the chakra tails unfurled. It was an odd sight to say the least. "Kurama has not taken over. What is the meaning of this?" Hattori demanded in the raspy scream. "The plan was to meet. Forgive me, Oji-sama, but we took quite a liking to one another," Naruto interrupted Hattori for the first time in life. "We have come to an agreement that we shall fight side by side as partners and friends, and more importantly, equals." Hattori's old eyes looked as though they were about to bulge of their sockets. "What?" he exclaimed. "The seal." He then added hurriedly. "What did you do to the seal, boy?" "I modified it," Naruto revealed with slight reluctance. Hattori gasped and choked on his spittle. "Do not worry, Oji-sama. I modified only a little to enable Kurama to speak to me directly." "When did you learn how to do such a thing?" Hattori demanded, irate. "I did not teach you how to do metal with a seal of a caliber such as yours." Naruto knew better than to smile or even give a minute indication of smugness with Hattori. The old man was clearly displeased and practically foaming at the mouth with rage as though he was about to have a stroke. "I memorized the foundations of the Tekko Fuin stolen from Uzushiogakure and modified my seal to allow Kurama and myself a means of direct communication," he repeated as he added more details. "I also modified the Hake Fuin my father created to make it easier for myself to borrow Kurama's chakra and to allow Kurama to come out and materialize a body when necessary. Those two are the main principles of change. However, there is one final aspect of Hake Fuin I've changed, but that will not become relevant for a long time. I call it Hake Tekko Fuin Shiki." Hattori's bulging threatened to pop out of their sockets in complete and utter shock as he struggled for a response. The 8 trigrams iron armor seal method sounded absurd on the face of it. What made it even more unbelievable was the fact a 10-year-old, genius or not, was capable of creating. "One moment," Hattori said as he regained his voice. "Does this mean he discovered my own modifications?" "No, that's impossible. As gifted as he may be, my own modifications are as perfect as modifications to a seal ever could be. There is no way why this child would have spotted them." The relic calmed himself, confident his heir had not noticed his adjustments. "How will the Kyuubi materialize a body?" he then demanded. "The fox's yin chakra was sealed for good, how will he be able to perform such a feat without yin-yang release? And what is this last change you speak of? Answer me, child, and quickly, before I truly lose my temper." Naruto flinched but answered promptly nonetheless. "Both questions have the same answer, Oji-sama," he began to explain. "While it is true Kurama in theory cannot materialize a real body due to the imbalance in his chakra as a result of my father sealing his yin chakra, I have modified the Hake Fuin to convert the yang chakra Kurama still possesses into yin chakra, which Kurama can then mold into yin-yang chakra in order to materialize." Hattori remained silent as he listened, for once not interrupting his heir. Thus Naruto continued explaining. "This will work assuming Kurama's soul can still remember the feeling of yin chakra and use that experience to successfully convert some of his yang chakra into yin chakra. In a sense, my connection with Kurama will grant me a Kekkei Genkai like the Yanbi, Son Goku, and its container. In theory, I will be able to perform yin and yin-yang release. If the Kyuubi materializes, then he would have to half his yang chakra to create perfect balance between yin and yang," Hattori stated, to which Naruto nodded affirmatively. "Does that not make him weaker?" In secret, Hattori could barely contain himself. Yin-yang release. That is the power only the Rakudo Sennin was capable of. This is too good to be true. Naruto gave another indication of his head. Under normal circumstances, yes, but as I grow older, my chakra reserves will become more vast, thus I will be capable of lending Kurama my yang chakra and he will be able to convert his own into yin chakra while at the same using enough of mine to reach his former power. That remains a theory, Hattori bit out venomously. Do you understand what you have done, child? Suddenly and impulsively, Hattori struck Naruto across the face with as much force his old bones could muster, sending the youngster hurtling and bounding across the floor. Naruto came to painful stop but picked himself up, refusing to hold his stinging cheek as he fell completely silent. He knew better than to talk back to his grandfather. If he did, there were means by which Hattori could inflict pain that required no physical contact whatsoever. And he had been on the receiving end of such punishment enough times to remember exactly how horrible it was. Your life is now fully entwined with that of the fox. You have indefinitely jeopardized my ambitions. Hattori shouted at him, coating him with spittle as he exhaled deeply. I am sorry, Oji-sama, Naruto apologized with a low bow. I merely tried to accelerate your plans for me. Hattori spat on the ground, letting out a sound of utter disappointment as he turned back to Naruto with a resentful glare. You have put yourself at the beast's mercy now that you have merged your power. I told you to simply meet the beast, not to befriend it like my fool sister. In the pit of his stomach, Naruto felt a hot sensation. Kurama clearly did not like the remark in regards to his first Jinchuriki. Kurama, please calm down. Oji-sama is upset, he doesn't mean it. I wish to destroy this relic, Kurama replied through their mental connection. Why do you allow him to treat you like this? You could destroy him in an instant if you wished. I do not want to harm him, Kurama. He is the only biological family I have left. Are you listening, boy, or is the fox polluting your mind with his filth? Hattori demanded as he took steps closer as though he were about to strike him again. Are you? I am listening, Oji-sama, Naruto replied obediently as always. I will not let Kurama sway me from what it is you want me to do. Uzushiogakure will be revived, according to your plans, Oji-sama. I will do whatever is necessary to make our ambitions comes true. By any means necessary. Hattori lowered his hand he had raised to strike the boy and exhaled deeply. This was the first time Naruto had sounded so sincere about agreeing to, wanting to follow his plans. Good, was all he said simply as he turned his back on Naruto. You will be able to control the Kyuubi's power sooner than expected, if what you say is true, he stated. Then our plans must accelerate to accommodate that fact. Naruto nodded. Yes, Oji-sama. 1 year later. Another year had passed and Hattori had since began to train Naruto's taijutsu, an area he had previously been lax in educating Naruto on as the boy's body grew at a stubbornly slow pace. Being too old to train the boy himself and Taji not being up to scratch after a decade of inactivity, Hattori had no choice but to rely on some kinjutsu of his own, the Edo Tensai. A jutsu he helped the Nadaime Hokage, Senju Tobarama, to develop. However, it was far too risky to do it himself, thus he had Taji master the jutsu under his guidance. It would not have been possible had it not been for his stroke of brilliance in temporarily linking Naruto's chakra to his surrogate mother's through a seal designed by Uzumaki generations ago. Rather than used by the Uzumaki themselves, as they had inherited incredible chakra reserves from their Rakudo Sennin ancestry, they sold the designs of these seals to Kusagakure, which once stood at the top of the shinobi world. 2. It had taken a while for Taji to leave the island and bring back suitable sacrifices, but at last everything fell into place. Hattori was exceedingly anxious. He had not performed this jutsu for many years, not because out of some putrid sense of morality but rather a general abhorrence of such perverse jutsu that meddled with the cosmic balance of life and death. Still, he reasoned with himself that it was a necessity. While Naruto had clearly inherited his father's physique, it would go to waste if he did not cultivate it soon. Are you ready, boy? Hattori called as they stood in a clearing far from the village. Standing about 50 feet away from his ancestor and surrogate, Naruto gave a curt nod. Yes, Oji-sama, he answered. His voice betrayed his anxiety, but fortunately Hattori did not complain as he too felt it. The relic looked to Taji, whose eyes were blank, unfocused, devoid of any conscience. At his nod, Taji proceeded to go through a string of hand seals and placed her hands on the gritty dirt. Kuchiyos, Edo Tensai. Her voice sounded almost robotic. As her palms touched the dirt, Naruto felt a tremendous pull on his chakra as it surged out of him and into his surrogate mother, who then channeled the chakra into the forbidden jutsu. It left Naruto with a foul feeling throughout his body. How he hated the seal causing it and wanted to rip the Fuin tag off his body, but Hattori had forbid him from doing so, and thus he endured as he always did, his jaws clenched and fists tightened. The neat row of sacrifices sank through the earth, each replaced a moment later by white coffins that shot up moments later, all numbered 1 to 4. The coffin lids exploded outwards simultaneously as 4 figures stepped out of them. Hattori cackled with glee at the sight of his deceased clansmen. Obtaining their DNA acquired a mere trip to the Uzumaki tombs in the labyrinth below the village. Had his body been capable of doing so, he would have revived them a long time ago. Where am I? Demanded the tallest and most handsome of the 4. His voice was deep, his skin flawless and his red hair tied in a ponytail fell below his shoulders. He wore red body mesh and black-fitting armor with Uzumaki emblems and tassels, and carried a long katana on his hip. Ah, yes, Hattori continued his manic laughter. Uzumaki Hiei, the only Uzumaki to have ever been born with the Jinten Kekkei Genkei. 1. A child born as a result of rape, Uzumaki Hiei was born to an Uzumaki clanswoman, who didn't know who the father was, as there had been multiple perpetrators. Hiei's mother, an Uzumaki spy, died 2 years after giving birth in the highlands far from Uzu no Kuni, leaving her son to be put in an orphanage until word reached the Uzumaki clan, who came to collect him years later after reports came in of a 6-year-old child with fierce red hair and an affinity for Jinten. Under the tutelage of the Uzumaki, Hiei became to be revered as one of the world's greatest swordsmen. His exploits were well known in literature of nearly 100 years ago. Oh, what is this? Could this be the Edo Tensai? Another wondered out loud. Significantly shorter than Hiei, this Uzumaki was of a stockier build and had a broad set of shoulders and a thick scar running vertically over his left eye. He wore a gray and blue sleeveless combat gi and simple trousers. He had a receding hairline, and his hair was the same shade of Uzumaki red as Hiei's but much shorter. Naruto's eyes narrowed on the sight of second Uzumaki, recognizing his appearance immediately from the stories once told him as a boy. Uzumaki Gozu, you once attempted to assassinate the Nadaime Raikage. And I failed miserably. Gozu pointed a thick finger to his chest. Under his muscle shirt ran thick scars covering his entire torso. And he left me with a mark to remember him by even after my death. In the back of his mind, Naruto wondered if Gozu was really a member of the Uzumaki. If his appearance alone wasn't out of the norm, his easygoing demeanor certainly was. Yes, I remember having to clean up after you, the third resurrected Uzumaki chimed in. He was the second tallest and had slim build, long hair that covered his left eye and a perpetual sneer of arrogance plastered on his face. He wore traditional white and blue robes with the Uzumaki crest and tassel. He carried a long bow staff in his gouged wrapped hands, a whip on his hip, and a large orange scroll on his back. Uzumaki Tenjin, you have undoubtedly heard of me, the resurrected Uzumaki assumed. The youngest Uzumaki to ever attain Seals Master status. You mean the second youngest Seals Master? Hattori fell in forcefully with a growing snide smirk of his own. The first would be me, dear cousin. To think you actually survived this long, you have not aged well, Tenjin drawled with unveiled distaste. You have undoubtedly summoned us through the use of Edo Tensai, the most clever of the resurrected deducted immediately. I assume we were the best DNA matches you could find. Hattori neither confirmed or denied this, thought it appeared Tenjin did not care anyway as his eye fell on the fourth and last of the resurrected. What is this misfit doing here? Tenjin snarled. Uzumaki hero, Hattori whispered the name with clear exhilaration. Naruto recognized the name immediately and frowned, uncertain of what to think or say. Perhaps the second most gifted ninjutsu specialist the Uzumaki have ever known. Hiro looked like most Uzumaki. His hair was red, going up in gravity-defying spikes like Naruto, his skin lightly tanned and for the most part unscarred. He wore the traditional blue Uzushiogakure battle armor over baggy, white robes with the Uzumaki spiral emblem. The second, Hiei spoke with a light frown of confusion. He looked to the other resurrected Uzumaki for answers. Isn't it obvious? Tenjin said, glaring at Naruto as he sized him up. This child has surpassed even Hiro. Interesting, Hiro spoke for the first time. Naruto noted how calculated and reserved he sounded, and while faint, he could hear a touch of condescension. Interesting, is it, traitor? Hattori growled at Hiro with contempt. The other resurrected Uzumaki seemed to agree with Hattori. Even Hiei, who looked rather odd with his damning glare, accentuated even more by the black sclera and white iridides as a result of the Edo Tensei. So it is true, what you said, Oji-sama. Naruto knew the story of Uzumaki Hiro very well. Hattori had told him only once, but the hatred in his voice had seen to it Naruto would never forget it. Uzumaki Hiro was born to Uzumaki branch house parentage. Growing up, he soon proved to be a prodigy amongst prodigies, a true genius in every sense. Hiro was born with such a strong chakra. His chakra chains, an ability known only to Uzumaki, first appeared when he was but an infant, much to the shock of the Uzumaki clan, as the average Uzumaki usually awakened their chakra chains during their teenage years. Predictably, he was immediately put in advanced ninjutsu training and excelled greatly. Then, one day in the beginning of the First Great Shinobi War, Uzumaki Hiro deserted his comrades, who were ambushed soon after his disappearance. Hiro was found dead weeks later in a valley in Earth Country. Fortunately, before Iwa forces could recover his body, he had set his body up with a reverse 4-symbol seal in the case of his death. As a testament to his prowess, Uzumaki Hiro took down over 1,000 shinobi with him. Why are we here? Uzumaki Tenjin demanded, making an unpleasant noise as he gnawed his teeth impatiently. What do you want, Hattori? Hattori sneered at his cousin. You always lacked patience, Tenji, he chided. Nonetheless, the relic clapped his hands, signaling the resurrected shinobi to listen up. I have brought you all back to realm of the living for one reason and one reason only. And what would that be? Gozu inquired nonchalantly. Out of all the Uzumaki brought from the dead, he seemed to mind it the least. In fact, it was as if he enjoyed being alive again. Uzumaki Naruto, Hattori said simply, pointing at the blonde Uzumaki in question. He may not look like us, but he is one of us. He is the son of the Yondaime Hokage and one of our own, Uzumaki Kushina. As you undoubtedly have already gathered, he gave a great sigh as he said it, Uzushio and the Uzumaki are no more. So they won. Hiro glared at Hattori with intense hatred. Naruto could not imagine how it was justified. I told you fools what would happen, but you didn't listen. Now look where we are. Be quiet, traitor, Tenjin bellowed, raising his bow staff threateningly. The ceremonial Uzumaki emblem tassels shook as though the staff was tuned to its wielder's emotions. You have no right to criticize us after you abandoned your own. I should destroy you right now. You stubborn fool, Hiro spat contemptuously as he slid into a fighting stance. You dare to threaten me? Enough. Hattori bellowed angrily, and the resurrected fell silent immediately. What has happened in the past cannot be changed, but we have an opportunity for the future. That opportunity lives in this child, Uzumaki Naruto. None of them made any comment. Instead they looked back to Naruto again, staring at him as Hattori spoke. I have brought you back to aid me in teaching him in our ways. Through him, the Uzumaki can live once again and Uzushiogakure can be restored. You haven't changed at all, Hattori. Hiro's voice was as cold as ice. The resurrected Uzumaki made no attempt to hide his utter disgust. This fixation with tradition and protocol. All of these rules, don't you ever get tired of them? Hattori opened his mouth to respond angrily, but Hiro already turned to Naruto. I have been in your position, Uzumaki Naruto. I know what it is like to have your entire life dictated to you. Doesn't it anger you, fill you with rage, how much you must do and how little choice you have? This life without freedom, if you can even call it a life, is a wretched thing, is it not? So that is why you betrayed the clan, Naruto realized as the reason for Uzumaki Hiro's betrayal became clear. It was a strange notion to him, but it made sense in a way he couldn't quite put in words. He had never really thought of living his life in any other way than he did now. The more he realized how odd his life was, the more he realized he could relate to Hiro's past predicament. It scared him. Was there something wrong with living a life of routine, waking up early, eating the nutritious meals prepared for him by his surrogate, reading, training and resting in accordance to Hattori's schedule? Naruto opened his mouth without being clear with what he wanted to say, so he fell silent. You want to be free, don't you? Hiro asked quietly. His voice took a more sympathetic and gentle tone. Free from all of these responsibilities and duties. Then kill this old relic and. Hiro's eyes suddenly rolled back into his head and he fell forward, collapsing with a resounding thud. Insolent fool. Hattori trembled with rage and breathed heavily. Even now he dares to defy our ways. Trampling on Uzumaki protocols never sat well with the relic and it could easily set him off into a fit of rage. It was exactly why Naruto made a habit out of never bringing up his resentment of certain aspects of his training. I'm assuming you've got ways to control him, otherwise you just wasted a lot of chakra resurrecting this filth, Tenjin commented from the sidelines. Of course I have my ways. Hattori took offense to the comment. Now then, I'm assuming you three will comply freely. Gozu gave a shrug and stifled a yawn. Death is boring, he said simply. I'll comply if it means I'll be able to see the revival of our clan. While I am not particularly pleased with being brought back, Hiei began as he placed a hand on his okatana's hilt, I will serve my clan once again. The two looked to Tenjin who rolled his eyes and dramatically threw his arms in the air. Fine, fine. Seeing as I don't have much of a choice anyway, I'll agree to help you, so long as that filthy traitor keeps his distance. That won't be a problem, Hattori assured. 2 years later. Naruto aged 12. Jiraiya had once again returned from his long spell of absence. Safe to say, he was rather impressed with Taji for raising such a fine and powerful young man, although he expressed some concern on Naruto's detached disposition. Well, he's only got me and Hattori-san so it can't be helped he's a little different from others his age, Taji reasoned rather defensively. And with me stuck doing research and Hattori being too old to even care, he's usually left to his own devices, she said rather defensive of her son. I can hardly take credit for how strong he is, Jiraiya-san, Naruto mostly teaches himself. I don't think there's anything else I can teach him. This prompted Jiraiya to stay for a few more days, in which he decided to spend most of his time with Naruto to get to know his godson better as well as teach him a thing or two. Naturally, it did not go unnoticed by the sage how advanced Naruto's taijutsu was, and if that weren't strange enough, he mastered summoning toads within a matter of hours, it was almost as if he had done it before. But then, Jiraiya thought, who would have taught him how to summon? He had seen Taji's file, and as skilled as she was, she had not signed a summoning contract. Geez, you sure pack a punch, kid, Jiraiya commented, shaking his hand to get the blood flowing once again as Naruto flew back and landed in a skidding crouch. Alright, I think I've seen enough. Taji's done a great job raising you. You're finally ready to come home. Expecting a smile, Jiraiya was unnerved by the frown Naruto shot him. What is it, Naruto? This is my home, Jiraiya Kyofu, Naruto said icily. Simply because I was born in Konoha, does not mean it is my home. How could it be? if I spent only a few days there before you asked my mother to throw her life away to raise me in solitude? Jiraiya's brows furrowed. Do you resent me, Naruto? No, Naruto answered truthfully. Your insensitiveness towards my mother's sacrifice and my home, however, offends me. I believe Oji-sama would disapprove. Is that so? Jiraiya approached the youth with a curious feeling budding in the pit of his stomach. Hours later, Taji and Jiraiya were seated in the house whilst Naruto was out to find firewood. Go back? She asked, the notion of actually returning having clearly not been expected so soon. He is only 12 years old, Jiraiya-san. He'll be 13 soon, meaning he will able to graduate the academy in Konoha and become an official shinobi, Jiraiya told her. Whilst she mulled it over, he looked around him and found that the house, despite being cluttered with books and scrolls, was in excellent shape. Now that he thought of it, the ruins of Uzushiogakure seemed to have been cleaned up. I'm not sure, Jiraiya. Jiraiya gave a sigh. He had hoped not to have to use this particular card. Look, Taji, I know you've grown attached to Naruto, but don't forget I'm also his godparent and the agreement was that he would return to Konoha once he was able to defend himself. The scandalized look of outrage in Taji's face was a clear sign he shouldn't have gone there. So what? You've hardly gotten to know him, Jiraiya, you're almost never there. How would you know the first thing about him? Why does he have to return now? He's not ready. From what I've seen, he's well beyond the level his peers in Konoha will be at. He's incredibly powerful, Taji. He's ready, he said with a finality they both knew she could not defy. Then, with a softer tone, he added, look, this will be a good thing for Naruto. He needs to be in contact with kids his own age or he's going to end up being completely incapable of interacting with other people, Taji. Do you really want that? There were no further arguments after that. In a few months Naruto would return to Konoha, on time to graduate with peers his own age. Not long after hammering out the details, Jiraiya once again left with a promise of meeting them in Konoha. You embark upon your journey soon, boy. Naruto knelt before Hattori and bowed his head. Yes, Oji-sama. Jiraiya Kyofu deems it prudent I go and enroll in the Konoha Academy for Shinobi Arts. I believe he wishes for me to interact with others my own age. Such foolishness. Hattori growled. The ancient Uzumaki released a breath of frustration. It matters not, this simply accelerates my plan. Naruto looked up to face his grandfather, looking him in the eye. Your plan, Oji-sama? Naruto asked. Hattori never discussed his intentions with Naruto. He never so much as mentioned he had anything planned outside of Uzushiogakure. No, all he ever told Naruto was of the greatness of the Uzumaki, the power they once held in the world. Oji-sama, may I ask what plans you speak of? No, Hattori barked in his raspy voice. But I shall tell you, child. I shall tell you the true purpose of your training. Naruto's eyes widened. It was an uncharacteristic act in comparison with his usual monotone, stoic character. Listen closely, child, Hattori told him. I have told you a great many recounts of Uzumaki history. I have told you of the Rakudo Sennin, the creator of the shinobi world and ancestor of many clans, from the Uchiha to Senju and the Uzumaki. You have sat on my knees and listened closely as I told you of the true world, the shinobi world which is on the verge of collapsing, I sense it. Hattori's outburst was sudden and he could hear the madness in his grandfather's voice. And now, as the day of your return to Konoha approaches, I will finally reveal to you what your true purpose is. Naruto did not dare to speak and incur Hattori's wrath and so remained silent, as he had been taught to do when the older Uzumaki spoke. Your mission is to go to Konoha and create a support system for the revival of Uzushiogakure. Upon arriving in Konoha, you will make yourself useful to the Sandaime. That whelp has always had soft heart for children, he believes strongly in the will of fire, thus he will not distrust you the way he should. Naruto nodded to this, albeit hesitantly with the concept of interacting with other people. Hattori frowned, but made no comment and continued. You will provide the Sandaime with your revised Fuinjutsu plan, you know the one I mean. Naruto nodded obediently. Then, after you have gained his trust, you will set out to establish alliances with Konoha's influential clans. Perhaps it is a good thing you will return to the academy, there is bound to be a few heirs you can rally to your side. To what end, Oji-sama? Naruto asked. His head bowed obediently once more. You will especially attempt to gain the favor of the daughters of Konoha's clan heads, child. Naruto stiffened at the notion, prompting Hattori to sneer with disgust. Such hesitance is beneath you, child. What a modesty is there to this? Only a few years ago you would have had no choice in who you were to wed. Of course, only a few years ago was a lot longer for Naruto than it was for Hattori. You will one day father many children with suitable women. That is your responsibility as the head of this dying clan when I am gone. You have known this for quite some time. Forgive me, Oji-sama. Hattori snarled but continued. Do you follow me so far, child? Naruto nodded. Then repeat to me what I just instructed you to do. My mission is to make myself useful to Sandaime. Upon arrival in Konohagakure no Sato, Naruto droned obediently. I will earn his trust and minimize his suspicion of me. Then what? I will then proceed to establish a support network. I will befriend heirs of influential clans, and aim to seduce the daughters of particularly influent clans. I believe this is why you had me research the Hidenjutsu belonging to Konoha's most prominent clans, such as the Yamanaka's Shintenshin Jutsu, Oji-sama. Indeed, Hattori confirmed. Then, am I also correct in assuming you expect me to reveal my knowledge of these jutsu to the Sandaime to gain his trust? Naruto inferred. Hattori growled approvingly. You are correct, child. Once Hiruzen believes you are easily manipulated, and you will make sure to give him this impression, boy, Hattori warned threateningly, he will believe he can make you one of his followers. Naturally, you will appear as if you hang on his every word, and when the time is right you will ensure he will support the revival of Uzushiogakure. Naruto bowed his head obediently as Hattori continued to reveal the details of his plans to his heir. It was evident in the way Hattori spoke he had been planning this for years, almost as soon as he first laid eyes on Naruto when he was but a baby. Naruto remained silent as his ancestor drilled him with instructions, nodding once every few minutes as Hattori dove into specifics. The plan was relatively simple to understand, yes, but it would take a lot of doing. It could take him years before he saw anything coming to fruition. Naruto understood this quite clearly, but he had long since been taught to dedicate his life to revival of Uzushiogakure and the Uzumaki clan. Child, it is of the utmost importance you forge an alliance with the Hyuga clan. In order to make our ambitions come true, it is imperative that you do. The Hyuga clan, Naruto repeated with genuine confusion. Why is that, Oji-sama? Hattori beckoned Naruto to follow him as he crawled to his feet. Come, I shall show you. Naruto got to his feet and followed Hattori as the old man led him to his house, where he knew a hidden passage would bring them to the underground labyrinths of Uzushiogakure. Ooh, Uzushiogakure underground. Come quickly, boy. Hattori hobbled past the iron-wrought double doors into a spacious area equipped with technology commonly found in laboratories, large sources of microscopes, organs conserved in jars, scalpels and other surgical tools and much more. Unsurprisingly, given Hattori's age, albeit organized, the laboratory was rather filthy. What stood out the most in the laboratory was the facing the doors. Instead of concrete, the wall was filled with square containers with preservative fluids that contained pieces of flesh and vials filled with blood and other fluids, and eyeballs. There were dozens of them aligned in a neat row with aged plaques beneath them, upon which were specifics details were written. Naruto's eyes narrowed immediately as they recognized some of the names on the plaques. Oji-sama. Hattori gave a mad cackle, delighted in his heir's surprise. Beautiful, isn't it? Isn't it? The relic hobbled over to the wall of specimens, palming the table before it as he reached it. This, my boy, is the true reason behind the silent massacre of Uzushiogakure.